So first up is the group one, which is Facilitators and Barriers to Success, and the moderator was Bob Hyatt from the University of California at San Francisco.
Ta-da! So, how do we get going here?
So this you can forward, that's the pointer.
Okay. We had two questions. One was, what are the critical factors or activities that are required to successfully apply systems modeling to epidemiologic studies? The group was great. Everybody had input and really good thoughts. There was no problem getting the ideas on paper. There was more of a problem with prioritization. But there was little question about the importance of review. Everybody felt that that was a critical piece. Hello, hello, hello. Everybody thought that that was a critical factor. So review needs to include the kind of expertise that understands modeling. This means a multidisciplinary type of review. We even thought a dedicated review section to complex modeling should be considered. That was the first idea. Content-paired experts refers to having experts on the committee for review that understand the kinds of ideas that are being proposed, so that there's clear expertise on the review committee to look at the complexity of the model. Dedicated funding, no surprise there. But how do you do the dedicated funding? And we talked about a number of different models. We discussed the history from NCI of funding transdisciplinary research enterprises like the TTURCs and the communications seekers and TREC and so forth. That's one model. Another model is funding interdisciplinary training, like the Health and Society Scholars for Robert Wood Johnson. And a third model was suggested that pulled people together around conferences or workshops periodically to discuss, as we have done these last 2 days, common issues and interests. So this would not be for funding new projects, but rather taking advantage of existing expertise and interest, but bringing it together. The concept of, the key concept here is that in order to do this kind of work, you need a face-to-face time, familiarity with each other and your disciplines and the jargon involved. So these kinds of funding opportunities can be problem-based: obesity, tobacco, income inequality, whatever you want, but that's one way to do it. And then the other focus on the funding is on the infrastructure, which needs to be sustainable, as we say below. Appropriate training, we felt also was a critical factor. Appropriate training is refers to at what point in the educational process does the introduction of this kind of activity get introduced. One strong factor in our committee was early and often. Another was when there's been some maturity of development of individual disciplines that then can be shared across the group. But the key thing is to think about not only an individual discipline, but think transdisciplinarily or cross-disciplinarily, as we have discussed in the last couple of days. Incubation just emphasizes the importance of time to establish familiarity across different disciplines so that work can be done with respect and with lack of condescension to others in the process. Leadership, we also felt was important. We discussed whether leadership, that's the mortar maybe partly that Bruce talked about today, but does leadership get inherited, or is it a learned activity? No question that it's important. Patty Mabry thought perhaps the way to think about this is that there's a predisposition to good leadership, and it needs to be fostered and supported to make these kinds of things work. And then sustainability was the final thing we thought was critical. If it's a funding enterprise or some sort of infrastructure which has a limited period of time, then there's a risk of losing the value of the activity. And so how does one sustain these kinds of things over time? And there's a number of different ways that we discussed about doing that. Some of them have been successful, some not. The CTSAs are one example that have gone on for some time now, but they themselves have some issues in terms of sustainability. The Health and Society Scholars, through Chris Brockrod, actually developed the Interdisciplinary Association for Population Health Studies, was a way of maintaining the relationships that group had, and I think that's extended to many different institutions. The second question we had was, and there'll be time for questions right after this, and also comments from my colleagues. What are the barriers to applying systems modeling to epidemiologic studies, and how do we overcome it? So this is like after they've been done or funded or accomplished, how do they get applied? What are the problems? We felt at the top of this list, and again, it was difficult to prioritize exactly, but the importance of engaging stakeholders, engaging with stakeholders, important preposition there, early on. So it's not just that you have to bring your biostatisticians in early on, but you have to talk to the individuals or institutions who are going to be the recipients of the work early on, so that you know that they'll be valuable and receptive to them at the end. Health equity is something that we felt was very important to mention. All throughout what we're talking about here is trying to solve population problems, and a large part of that, as we all know, is addressing the inequities we see in society. So thinking about stakeholder engagement with that lens, we wanted to emphasize up front. Access and sharing and use are important barriers. This applies not only to data, but to models and to sharing code. So the issues there are partly financial support, which comes later in this little bulleted list, but the processes and the sort of philosophy and the principles around access and data sharing, we felt was a critical barrier that needs to be solved. Sharing code can be a big and heavy lift, because code can be difficult to understand, require the participation of the creators. This is true for all these three bullets here, but you can understand the issue. Data interoperability and standardization. I've been involved in a number of projects where harmonization was needed after the fact when things were collected. Huge headache. Much better to think about standardization of measurement ahead of time, and because of the importance of interoperability. Financial support, again here, but in particular for documentation. This is a process that has to go on during the development and extension of data. Hardening of software refers to the use of software enough that it becomes trouble-free and workable, and then the constant need to update software and data over time. And that sort of touches also on the last point, which is the need for researchers to use their models, understand their foibles and weaknesses until they are hardened. That's my presentation. Are there any comments from my colleagues in the group? Patty has a thought. Where's our second microphone back there, you guys?
Does this work? Yeah, okay. So thank you so much, Bob. You did a wonderful job herding the cats in the room. And we did. We all got called on. We all got a chance to contribute. So that was really wonderful. Could you go back to the first slide, please, for just a second? I just wanted to maybe emphasize or make clear about the point about review was partly that 1.1.1, whatever it is, the first bullet point under review there, modeling methods and content paired experts. One of the ideas that we talked about was the one that was raised yesterday, and I'm not sure who to attribute it to, but it was Stacy. It was a good idea about pairing a content area expert and a methods expert on as both primary reviewers, although the risk to the applicant is that you're going to get more longer pink sheets, right, with more criticism. However, it may be the way to go anyway. Just wanted to kind of clarify that. I thought that was...
Thank you. Any other clarifications or additions? I'm sorry, we don't have a lot of time. Jonathan, just quick.
The part of the infrastructure would be to, the dedicated funding for infrastructure would be to include needs that all projects may need across a call. A call, let's say, funds 6, 8 projects. They would all have similar needs.
Core funding type of idea.
Core funding,
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, good. Everybody get that? So you know, in various structures that we're familiar with, cancer centers, we have cores that serve many different purposes. Somehow having funding that would serve a common purpose, so we didn't have to repeat. Anything else? Okay, next.
Oh, well, I guess I wanted to know if you I guess I wanted, sorry, to make this clear, I wanted to see if anyone from the audience had something to add to what our group had talked about. And I also just, the previous slide, next slide. What?
I just wanted to mention that the data access and sharing and use, and also the data interoperability and standardization were two themes that came up in our group, which was talking about needs for data.
Is there anything else from the audience, from the online audience?
Yeah, I have a comment about stakeholder engagement and incubation are crucial towards systems modeling, but funding constraints and time periods for these processes, quick turnaround of funding, my thing just went blank, but it makes it difficult. What are opportunities for addressing this when developing infrastructure for cancer systems EPI, which is something we could think about.
We'll record that. Yeah.
Very quickly, just since this seemed to anticipate maybe a mechanism for funding, I'm just repeating a comment from yesterday about these linear aims, or allowing in the call for applications, anticipating the need to iterate the aims as we learn from the models during the research. So if we stick with the old way, we're going to keep getting the old science. And I don't know quite how that gets translated into an RFA or a PA, but I think it's an important
Good. I think that's a new idea that we should add to the new review criteria. Right. Is what it would be. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Right. Okay. Good. So who's next up? Back to the previous slide too. God, this is popular, huh? Good.
I thought of what are critical activities or functions. It was actually trying to do it, as opposed to kind of having people. I didn't. So you went by review. You mean kind of on study section, and then funding, training. It seemed like figuring out how to actually model things is, in my mind, a pretty big barrier to success, because we talk a lot about theoretical ideas, but actually putting it into practice seems like it would be
Yeah, I think that falls under appropriate training, how to learn it.
But that's going to take a while.
Yeah.
I mean, but how do we train them without having done it ourselves?
Thank you for raising that. I think I would also put that under incubation. And what we're trying to do is get the people with the modeling methods expertise together with the content area experts and bake them, over time. And so we actually talked about doing such an activity. I mean, Bob didn't have time to summarize everything we talked about, but we talked about doing that in advance of a funding opportunity as a way to prepare the researcher community.
All right, with that, we're going to have to go to our next group. Thank you, everybody.